here's something I never thought I would say out loud again. JJK got a new chapter. And you want to hear another thing that I definitely never thought I would say out loud? The new chapter is about Ozawa, Nobara, Panda, and Uraume. You know, the 4 main characters of JJK. Megami, Takaba, Yuji, give me more Ozawa. That's what I always say. What's she up to? Is she ever gonna awaken to curse energy? How does she feel about the Mets? In fact, let's just give her her own spin-off. And don't even get me started on Panda, man. You know all the arcs he showed up in, right? There was the Kyoto school arc. And then he kind of fought Hikari. Oh, there was also that time he ran from Sukuna and Shibuya. I mean, come on. That's the real MC of the story. And so if anybody's deserved a time in an epilogue, it's him. Right? Well, no. Probably not. But while I do sound like I'm hating on the idea of this epilogue right now, actually, I really liked these 14 additional pages. Listen, I've been incredibly vocal on the fact that I did not appreciate JJK's manga ending. And now, while I've made videos talking about how, after having some time to chew on this manga's ending, that I've actually come to appreciate it more as time has passed, even with all the time in the world to chew on this ending, I still didn't love it. Yes, I felt better about it, but there was still so many unanswered questions. What was the Jujutsu society going to look like now that the majority of the clan heads of some of the most important clans in the world were gone? Why were the idea of cursed corpses introduced as a concept at all if we were never going to expound on their role in society? Was Yuji ever going to get a truly happy ending? Was Megami going to become the head of the Zenin clan, or was it going to be Maki? Is there even going to be a Zenin clan? How did Sukuna and Uraume meet? Why did we never get any semblance of their backstory? They were just 2 characters slapped together and transported 1,000 years into the future together. And what's wild is that in this 14-ish additional page epilogue, a lot of those questions get answered, which is not something you would expect from an epilogue about Ozawa, Nobara, Panda, and Uraume, which is why I believe the reaction to this news when it first came out was so incredibly mixed. People figured there's no way you can wrap up this manga's slightly horrific ending with 14 pages dedicated to side characters. And while this epilogue absolutely does not tie a bow on all of the lingering questions this universe left us with, it does put a pretty substantial band-aid on the boo-boo. So if you absolutely despise the ending of JJK, this epilogue's probably not going to fix that for you. But if you're like me and you've softened up with time to the ending of JJK's manga, this is objectively kind of a nice Christmas present. A Christmas present that you and me are gonna unbox together. Yes, today is Christmas. Merry Christmas to all. And Happy Hanukkah. For the first time in my entire life, Christmas and Hanukkah are on the same day. And as the child of a half-Catholic, half-Jewish family, yeah, it didn't work out, surprise, surprise. Let's light a candle and tear into some wrapping paper because today we're talking JJK's new ending explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. The first epilogue that we get belongs to none other than the most important character in all of JJK, Ozawa. Maybe, and quite literally, the first time in history, this epilogue starts before the events of the manga. Not usually how epilogues work, but we'll take what we can get. And thus we see on the first page of this epilogue revolving around Ozawa and Yuji, presumably in their middle school days, standing outside in the snow. As Yuji talks to Ozawa, but he might as well be talking to himself because she doesn't really respond, as he says, I like snow. Compared to when you're young, things like fireworks and the sea get less special. But snow still holds this special place in my heart. To which Ozawa responds by meekly saying, me too. Now, for those of you who don't remember Yuji's domain expansion and how it brought him and Sukuna to Yuji's hometown, you'll remember how we explained that Yuji grew up in the northern part of Japan, a place that historically gets a lot of snow, and snow is a theme that comes up with Yuji a lot. Whether it was Yuji chasing down Mahito through a snowy forest as a wolf while Mahito formed into a rabbit, or the conversation that Yuji had about snow falling in his hometown with Sukuna after opening of his domain, snow and Yuji's love of it has been a recurring theme throughout JJK. And it seems as though in this epilogue, we're starting to understand why Yuji loves the snow so much. 1, because it gives him a special feeling that he felt as a child, and 2, possibly because of the fond memories he shares with Ozawa surrounding snow. We then cut to the second page of Ozawa's epilogue, and we're now in the future, in a proper epilogue timeline. And we see that Ozawa's back in her and Yuji's hometown, and seemingly she's alone. Thinking to herself, even though I'm home, surprisingly, I've met up with anybody that I know. She then continues on by thinking, even if I did bump into somebody that I know, they probably wouldn't recognize that it's me. Because if you'll remember, Ozawa looks very different now as an adult than she did in middle school, which is kind of fair to say about everybody, but she's gone through a particularly prominent transformation. She then continues her own thought train, thinking about how between middle school and high school, there's probably 200 people's faces who she knows. And yet, even knowing the faces of 200 people that supposedly could still live here, every single person that she passes, she does not know. And yet, as she walks around thinking about how she hasn't bumped into anybody that she knows, she thinks about how she'd like to bump into one person in particular. And that one person is Yuji. And wouldn't you know it, exactly as she's thinking those words, Yuji appears and says hello to her. And considering the fact that Yuji was the only person who was nice to her in middle school and the only person who would recognize her now after her glow up, I guess this kind of makes sense because supposedly he's the only person who would recognize her. And yet this throws Ozawa way off as she begins to stutter, Itadori-kun, you came home. And it's this point that Yuji reveals that after leaving for Tokyo, his grandfather's house was left as is, and therefore he's come back to his home village to take care of some of his grandfather's possessions and his home. And like, yeah, this makes sense. Yuji only had one living relative, and it was his grandfather, who was in a hospital and has since passed away. And like, while we saw Yuji return back to his hometown with his domain expansion, that wasn't actually him returning. Now this catches Yuko kind of by surprise because she's back in their home village for a very similar reason. She reveals that her grandmother's going to live in an old person's home, and therefore she's back in town to help pack her up and move her. Now in response to this, Yuji goes, "Phew, what problems we have despite being so young. Good job, Yuji. Way to relate to her issues." However, it's at this point that the conversation shifts from their grandparents to each other. As Yuko asks Itadori-kun, "Were you okay being in Tokyo?" And it's important to note here, remember, Ozawa doesn't know that Yuji is a sorcerer. Ozawa's not sensitive to cursed spirits or cursed energy. She doesn't know about that stuff, and the Jujutsu Society is specifically hidden from the purview of the general public. However, it was revealed to all of Japan that anomalies are happening, but only in Tokyo. And therefore, what Ozawa is asking about here is if Yuji was okay living in this highly tumultuous era of Tokyo's history. Not if he was okay after fighting against Sukuna or something more specific like that. Now, after asking this question, Yuko thinks to herself, well, I already knew you were okay because I asked Nobara, which reveals to us that Yuko and Nobara have been staying in contact specifically to talk about Itadori. Yuji responds to Yuko's question by saying, yep, I was in Shibuya, but I turned out fine. And I find this so interesting because Yuji is telling Yuko that he was at Shibuya, not Shinjuku. Obviously, there was major mass casualty events at both Shibuya and Shinjuku, with obviously Shibuya being the Shibuya incident and Shinjuku being the final battle against Sukuna. However, and I might be wrong here, but I don't think that I am, I believe all of the events of the final battle against Sukuna happened within a veil. And therefore the reason that Yuji is saying that he was at Shibuya and not Shinjuku is because the events of Shinjuku in the final battle against Sukuna may not be public knowledge the way that Shibuya incident was. However, unfortunately, where this line of logic gets a bit hazy is Yuko's thoughts in response to Yuji's response. See, because when Yuji tells Yuko that he was in Shibuya but came out fine, she thinks to herself, that's not what I was asking. Are those facial scars from that? ... Now, I believe what she's referencing here is, are those facial scars from Shibuya? As she continues thinking to herself, you were smack dab in the middle of an explosion. Now, I don't remember exactly how the government tried to cover up the Shibuya incident, but I don't remember them saying anything about an explosion. But then again, considering the fact that Sukuna and Joko's battle basically involved the sun being created and then thrown smack dab in the middle of Shibuya, I guess the government would probably have to work in some kind of explanation as to what was going on there. So maybe Shibuya was chalked up to being an explosion? I don't necessarily remember. Anyways, Yuji redirects the conversation away from him and says, what about you, Ozawa? And she lets him know that she was over in Makida. Now, for those of you who don't know, Makida is still technically in Tokyo. It's in the Minami ward. It's in the southwest side of Tokyo. It's pretty far out of the city center, though. Now, Yuji, in response to this, says, Makida, the city of mystery. That sure is amazing. And I'm not entirely sure why Makida is the city of mystery. In fact, all I really know about Makida is that it has a Snoopy museum, and that doesn't seem that mysterious to me. But I'm also not a Japanese person who lives in Tokyo, so that joke wasn't meant for me. But also, apparently it wasn't meant for Yuko, because Yuko has no idea what Yuji is talking about. So Yuji kind of brushes it off by saying, kidding. Yuji then continues on by saying, I'd actually already heard from Nobara that you were fine. And this spikes Yuko's blood pressure and heart rate because to her, this means that Yuji asked Nobara about her. And as she tries to calm herself down, as there really is no guarantee that Yuji asked Nobara, and maybe Nobara just told Yuji, Yuji realizes that it's snowing. And Yuko asks him if he still likes snow, revealing to Yuji that she remembers the conversation that they had in middle school. To which Yuji responds by saying, yes. Mysteriously, it's still special. Yuko then responds to Yuji to make this fiery conversation just a little bit more titillating as she says, I like snow too, as she thinks to herself how bright it is, and then says to Yuji, especially when it piles up. And Yuji, completely oblivious to the fact that this girl is hardcore crushing on him and very much looking for a romance to bloom between the two of them, says, yeah, makes you want to build a snowman. And listen, for every guy out there who's completely missed the signals of a woman and fumbled the bag, my God, is this a relatable moment. But Yuko's thoughts keep rolling on as Yuji thinks about the perfect rolling techniques to use sticky snow to build a base for a snowman, as she thinks, because it's so similar to the person I like so much, in reference to Yuji. Now, just to clear it up, because there's a couple of speech bubbles that break up Yuko's thoughts here, Yuko's saying that she loves snow because of how bright it is and because it reminds her of Yuji, who shines in her eyes. We then cut to Nobara and Megami, who are presumably still in Tokyo because they're wearing their Jujutsu high uniforms. And we see as Nobara gets an Itadori sense, saying, right now, I believe Itadori's on the precipice of becoming an adult. To which Megami responds by saying, us children would never have talks about succeeding the family. So I think Nobara and Megami are implying that Yuji's getting laid here. I mean, like, obviously, yes, you could be like, oh, Yuji got his first girlfriend and his first kiss, he's becoming an adult. But Megami being like, us children would never talk about succeeding the family makes me feel as though he's saying, us children would never talk about making a family. Succeeding the family is a weird way to phrase it. But yeah, with that comes the end of the Ozawa epilogue. And it seems as though Yuji's got a girlfriend? And here's the thing. Of course they have zero chemistry, and this is only their second conversation. But like, this was the only option. So we just gotta be happy with what we got, I guess. I mean, I know I personally am happy with it. We then cut to the way more important second epilogue because it has nothing to do with those irrelevant characters like Yuji and Megami and Nobara. No, because in the second epilogue, we're talking about Panda. And really, this epilogue is the epilogue that takes the whole epilogue thing to the nth degree. Because on the first page of the Panda epilogue, we see that Panda is being kept in a storage facility of sorts, put on a shelf next to a bundle of katanas. And that bundle of katanas makes a lot of sense once you figure out who this storage shed belongs to. Now on this first page, we see a youngish girl leaning over and looking at Panda and saying, "Aw, it's a panda, so cute." However, in response to this, a boy who appears to be her brother says, "You can't just touch those. Those are Grandpa's treasures." To which the girl responds by saying, "Aw, but it's pretty cute for being a treasure." And the boy responds by saying, "It's supposed to be a special cursed corpse." And this freaks the girl out as she says, "A cursed corpse? Ew, I don't want it anymore. It's dirty." Throwing it at the boy, who has to catch it with one hand as he yells at her, saying, "Hey, you idiot." Now, all this commotion wakes up Panda as he points at the girl and says, "This kid's got a bad personality. Are you sure you're Yuta's granddaughter?" Now, some of you might be thinking to yourself, did they misspell Yaga? I mean, it would make sense if Panda was being handled by Principal Yaga's family. I mean, Principal Yaga was older and Principal Yaga created Panda, but no, they fully meant Yuta, as in Yuta Akotsu. And thus the two children currently manhandling Mini Panda are Yuta Akotsu's grandchildren. Now, it's this point that the narrator steps in to explain just what the hell is going on here. As narrator Kun tells us that Panda actually stopped working after a sorcery terrorism event in November 2018. Now, for those of you who don't remember, that's basically the beginning of the Culling Games. See, Panda wasn't really supposed to be a fighter in the Culling Games. Panda was paired with Hikari, and Hikari was supposed to do the majority of the important combat. However, in Tokyo Colony 2, where Panda and Hikari were, Panda and Hikari got split up, which eventually led to Panda having to battle against Hikari one-on-one. And that goes like really poorly for Panda. Panda has 2 of his 3 cores eviscerated and the entirety of his body eviscerated to the point that all that remains is Panda's head. Now that's kind of the last time that we see Panda until the second to last page of the last chapter of JJK, where we see Maki, Inumaki, and Yuta walking, presumably to class, and on Yuta's shoulder is a tiny version of Panda. And with Principal Yaga dead for defending Yuji in the lead up to the Culling Games, there's really nobody out there who can fix Panda as a cursed corpse. And therefore, apparently after the battle against Hikari, Panda lost all autonomy. However, none of that necessarily matters in this moment because Panda, the toy that these two children thought they were just playing with, just talked, which freaks out, obviously, both of Yuta's grandchildren. And as they scream, narrator Kun steps back in once again, saying that Panda lost all function in October of 2035, which seems to imply between 2018 and 2035, while Panda couldn't necessarily move on his own, he could still talk and interact with the world. And apparently in 2035, when Panda lost all function, Panda was registered into the Gojo family's storage, at which point its ownership was passed to Yuta Akotsu. The Gojo family clan head. And it's this point that it's revealed why we got a Panda epilogue. Yes, Panda was a semi-important side character, and I'm sure there were some people out there wondering what was going on with Mini Panda in the second to last page of the last chapter of JJK. But this right here illustrates the real reason why we were given a Panda epilogue in the first place. Was so the future of the Gojo clan, and more importantly, Yuta, could be revealed to us. See, not only does Yuta having grandchildren mean that eventually he married Maki, settled down, and had some kids, but this epilogue also shows that after Gojo's death, Yuta, who is a far-off relative of Gojo, took over as the next head of the Gojo clan. Now, this is kind of interesting because, well, one, it does mean that the Gojo clan is most likely still around and still a powerful sorcerer family. It does mean that the Gojo clan now in 2080 probably looks very different than it did back in 2018. See, while it is loosely implied that there is other members of the Gojo clan outside of Satoru, we actually don't ever see any of the other members of the Gojo clan. And Yuta taking over as clan head because he's a descendant as an Ikotsu of the Fujiwara and the Gojo clan are descendants of the Sugawara seems to imply that there weren't really any other suitable choices from the actual literal Gojo clan, which may mean, in a sense, that the Gojo clan as we knew it in 2018 are kind of extinct. This is interesting because it may mean the Gojo clan looks more like the Ikotsu clan than anything, meaning instead of the Limitless in the Six Eyes, the Gojo clan in this era may be more known for their ability to control vengeful cursed spirits, kind of like how the Zenin clan are known for their 10 Shadows technique. Obviously, all of that is conjecture. Anyways, Panda calls Yuta's two grandchildren loud, and the narrator says, even now in 2080, Panda still sometimes moves. Yeah, his epilogue is 2 pages long and is more about Yuta than it is about him, but hey, Panda's still kicking, so that's good, I guess. We then cut to Nobara's epilogue, which I'll admit is the worst out of the 4, which is unfortunate because for a long time she was my favorite character in JJK and actually still might be. I mean, she's the only character from JJK I have tattooed on me. But anyways, Nobara's epilogue opens up with Nobara sitting down at a table across from who else but her mother. For those of you who don't remember, Nobara's not close with her mother. In fact, Nobara pretty actively hates her mother, something that Gojo wishes she didn't, which is why in Gojo's farewell letter, he told Nobara where to find her mother. And thus it appears as though Nobara is taking Gojo up on his advice and seeking out her mother. And crazy as it sounds, it might be revealed in this epilogue why Gojo was able to find Nobara's mother's location. Anyways, Nobara sits down across from her mother and says, yo, which catches her mother off guard. And she goes, what, Nobara? What is it? You come to see mommy? To which Nobara responds by saying, of course not, idiot. It's just bad luck if I ignore somebody's last words, referring to Gojo's last words to her. And Nobara's mother's response to this is, I see, you're having fun. And that, on top of this entire conversation, begins to piss Nobara off. But Nobara's mom continues by saying, I see you went and became a sorcerer, huh? I had no talent for it. So grandma was always playing with you. And this tracks because when we were first introduced to Nobara as a character, she said that she would exorcise spirits out in the countryside where she was from because her grandmother was a sorcerer. And so I guess it would make a fair amount of sense that Nobara's grandmother would also try to turn Nobara's mother into a sorcerer. Now, all throughout this conversation, Nobara's mother was referring to Nobara as Nobara-chan, which is kind of an informal way to talk to a friend you've known for a long time. And based off everything that we see from Nobara's mother, that's basically how she is as a person. While she absolutely looks older than Nobara, she doesn't look that much older. She's got fully blonde hair. She shows cleavage. She's wearing a leopard jacket. She seems to be at the oldest in her mid to late 30s, but she acts much younger, closer to Nobara's age than her own, which seems to piss off Nobara as she tells her mother to stop talking like that. How old do you think we are? Showing that Nobara seems to have more maturity than her own mother. Nobara then continues on this flaming session of her own mother. She says, what you lacked was not the heart of a sorcerer, but rather the heart of a parent. Whether you were there or not, I would have become a sorcerer. Essentially telling her mother that the reason that Nobara got into being a sorcerer wasn't because her mom wasn't talented at it, but rather because Nobara wanted to do it for herself. Nobara then continues on by saying, but if you had never had me, you never would have had an excuse to quit being a sorcerer. She then continues on with her early 2000s Vince Carter dunk montage. Pathetic. Are you actually afraid of that old hag? But Nobara's mother just sits there and takes it as she lights a cigarette. And she says, is that all you have to say? Nobara, you wanted me to acknowledge you, didn't you? I'm sorry, I know you want me to say, oh, you've grown up so much. Oh, you're doing so good. I'm so proud of you. You probably just wanted to better the memories of your mother, even just a little bit. Too bad. I haven't changed one bit. Seducing the rich, getting drunk, and running through young men. I'm having so much fun. I feel like my life is the absolute best. Having your parents live at the core of your identity is kind of pitiful. So yeah, no, I'm starting to understand why Nobara hates her mother. She's She's kind of the worst. Now, Nobara immediately remembers that the strongest defense is a great offense, as she retorts, amazing. That was such a light lecture, it must have come from a planet with different gravity, which apparently is too high level of an insult for Nobara's mother to understand, as she simply responds with, what? Nobara then continues on by saying, from the bottom of my heart, I genuinely do not care about you. I'm just respecting the dead. And because I thought if I came here, I'd get to see something really funny. Solidifying that Nobara is not there to make amends with her mother and is just there to pay respects to Gojo. Now, Nobara's mom begins to catch on to what she believes is about to happen, and Nobara at this point leans over and says, right, Granny? And it's this point that we see for the first time Nobara's grandmother, who is terrifying looking. And as this one-eyed wench looms over Nobara's mother, Nobara watches on with a smile on her face as she tells her mother, who's stuttering, mother, to take her time. Now, unfortunately, this epilogue doesn't really accomplish anything. Like, yeah, we got to see more from Nobara, and we got to see Nobara reconnect with her mother, I guess, in a sense. But that wasn't really a lingering question that anybody had. With the first epilogue, we got to see that Yuji ends up with Ozawa, which is something that a lot of fans were clamoring for. Second epilogue showed us that Yuta and Maki had grandchildren, and that the Okotsu family took over the Gojo family. And while this epilogue does give us a peek into Nobara's life, and as a gigantic Nobara fan, I appreciate that, it feels the least necessary out of all 4 epilogues. However, since we're talking about epilogues that fans were 100% clamoring for, the 4th epilogue tells the story of how Sukuna and Uraume met, which, you know, once again, happens before the events of the manga, so not a traditional epilogue, more of a prologue kind of thing, but whatever. Once again, we take what we're given. But anyways, this epilogue starts 1,000 and some change years before the events of JJK, as we see Uraume sitting in the destroyed ruins of their home, sitting next to what's revealed to be their deceased mother and father, who are completely, along with the ruins of Uraume's home, encased in ice. And as Sukuna begins to approach Uraume says, I don't know, it's always like this. When I wake up, everybody around me is cold. Father and mother both died this way because of me. And Sukuna, kind of being the asshole, but also kind of being the sweetheart that he is, says, come with me, child. Yesterday, I accidentally broke my ice house, which is like a year 1000 version of a refrigerator. Basically being like, oh, sorry about your parents there, kid, but I got beers back at the house and they're not getting any colder. And thus on the next page, Sukuna is pointing at a pile of dead deer and says to Uraume, look over these. I don't want the meat to rot. And Uraume says, huh? And Sukuna says, make everything cold. You can do that, right? Which Uraume says, it's not like that. I can't control it. So Sukuna says, whatever. You want to eat these deer? Well, more specifically, in a much more Sukuna way, he says, you hungry? Are you an idiot? There's meat right in front of you. Eat it like a loving Italian mother. So Uraume sits down with some meat skewered on a stick and starts to cook it. And while they're at it, they also cook Sukuna a piece. And Sukuna, after eating it, says, tastes good. So Uraume lets him know that he cooled off the red meat at a low temperature and then dried it off with wind. Which means, essentially, in a sense, that Uraume refrigerated the meat before cooking it and then made sure it was dry before he cooked it. 2 things that are known to substantially improve the cooking quality of red meat. Now, Sukuna asks Uraume who taught them this, to which Uraume responds, no one really. I was bored. And thus Sukuna asks the only logical question that anybody would say in response to that little tidbit of information by asking Uraume, can you butcher humans? To which Uraume responds in the way that I'm sure all of us would respond, which is just nothing. Sukuna then goes on to say, well, it depends on the person, but person is kind of a delicacy. And while this seems like kind of a nonsensical conversation here, the subcontext of what Sukuna is saying right now is that finding the right human to spend your life with is a rarity, but when you find that person, it's a delicacy. Like, yes, obviously it sounds like Sukuna is talking about killing people, but in this moment Sukuna is basically saying, you are my human delicacy. As Sukuna isn't exactly well known for trying to bring humans into his life. Uraume then, in response to this question about butchering and eating people, asks Sukuna, why is it, even though Sukuna-sama is close to me, that Sukuna-sama does not get cold? And it's this point that we see Sukuna and Uraume walking off into the distance as Uraume holds on to Sukuna's arm, as Sukuna laughs and says, that goes for you as well, Uraume. Why don't you get cold when you stay by my side? And with that, all of the additional pages are done. And listen, the Uraume epilogue is my favorite one. Yes, I liked checking in with Nobara. Yes, I liked learning that Yuta was the head of the Gojo family. Sure, it's great to see that Yuji's in a thriving relationship, but seeing the beginning of Uraume and Sukuna's relationship makes me really happy. Not only has a look into the beginning of Sukuna and Uraume's story been something the fans have been clamoring for years, but just seeing Sukuna and Uraume only be sweet to each other makes me really happy. And getting the context of the beginning of their story makes how their story ends all the more impactful. And it's kind of wild that my favorite aspect of both this, the epilogue, and the final chapter of JJK has been the time that we got to spend with Sukuna and Uraume. Because as wild as it sounds, the people I wanted to have closure more than anyone were those two. And it feels as though the combination of chapter 271 and this epilogue, they have exactly that. So while this epilogue does not necessarily fix the ending of JJK, I do believe it makes it better. But I'm curious to hear what you guys thought of these additional pages. Do you believe it completely fixes the end of JJK, or do you still have lingering questions that you hope one day are answered? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Nick, you didn't say anything about the 2-page press release that Gege Katami made about being dumb and thankful to his editors, but also upset with his editors. And yeah, I don't know. I didn't understand what he was trying to say. It was the most convoluted drivel I've ever tried to read in my entire life. And maybe that's because it was poorly translated, but I have no idea what he was driving at.